Welcome to the Science for Sport podcast, where we dive into stories and insights that drive peak performance. Join us as we uncover the secrets behind the science of success. Here's your host, Richard Graves.
Hello and welcome to the Science for Sport podcast with me, Richard Graves. On this week's podcast, I'm asking, is there a crisis in football? The profile of the game has never been bigger, and potential is being spotted at an increasingly younger age by club scouts. So, how do we manage young athletes? What is the role that parents play in their development? And what are the pressures and expectations on them as they grow up? Well, joining me to discuss this is Andy Hyde, a strength and conditioning coach with experience particularly in this field, working with youngsters from the age of 12 and above. What are his thoughts? What are his experiences? Well, let's find out now.
Unlocking sports science to push the limits of human potential. This is the Science for Sport podcast.
Well, Andy, it's great to have you back on the podcast. Avid listeners will recall that, particularly during the COVID pandemic, you recorded several episodes with us. For those that perhaps are relatively new to downloading the Science for Sport podcast, brings up to speed with your experience to date and how you've come to be where you are today.
Yeah, so I'm a strength and conditioning coach. I'm based in Manchester, England, and I work with youth and senior players, elite players, especially for the senior, but we'll get onto the youths in a minute. So the whys behind why I do that are to build joy in the journey with the youth players, and with the senior players, it's more about building meaning behind movement and power behind the way they play. I went to university here in Leeds. I did a bachelor's degree, did a short stint with the Girls Academy at Leeds and in the NHS as well. I've also done some work with Science for Sport and Catapult, and that brings me here.
Quite a lot of experience in a relatively short space of time. Now, I started the introduction with the question, is there a crisis in football? You work a lot with young athletes from the age of 12 onwards. When we ask that question, what are we focusing on particularly? Because this is an age when obviously potential is being developed. The physiology of athletes is evolving and developing. It's quite a big subject to tackle.
So there's such a broad range of things going on because you have the ages before this as well. Players now are picking up a ball from the age of 3 years old and can be in with clubs that are academies, even though they're not technically signed, from the ages of like 6 to 7, and they might sign at 9 years old. So you're getting to the point now where players are specialising earlier and earlier in football, and the parents are considering other sports. And as soon as you get this opportunity to be with a club like your Man United or your Man Cities, they've got something to lose now, and they don't want to lose that. And this is why the specialisation is happening. This is why the rat races are happening. So by the time they're 12 years old, you know, parents and players can already be living a kind of a specialised athlete lifestyle for someone who's still a really young child that hasn't even started their maturation process properly yet.
It's a lot to take on at a tender age, isn't it? I mean, long gone now are the days when, I don't know, a Paul Gascoigne, say, or a George Best was seen kicking a ball about, and a club scout might have seen, oh, you want to have a look at this guy, Gaffer. We think he's got something. You've got academies at football clubs. You've got scouts scouting potential talent from 6, 7, 8 years old. And with the size of the Premier League and the profile of professional football now as well, so too come expectations, scrutiny. And it's not just from the professionals involved, it's from parents as well. So given your experience of working with youngsters day in, day out, how do you marry all this together to protect the individual concerned?
For me and the players I work with and the parents of those players that I try to educate and guide, it's finding the difference between encouragement and pressure. So for me, encouragement is trying to guide that player along in a positive, well, let's not say player, let's say child, in a positive.
That's what they are, aren't
That's
they?
what they are.
12 years old, you are a child.
Yeah. So guiding them along in a positive way. Well, you know, children still need to be able to build positive habits in terms of potentially the way they eat, how physically active they are, how much time they spend on the PlayStation. They still need to do these things you know, the kids at the end of the day, but they also need a little bit of a positive push to go in the right direction. Or if they come home from school, I'm tired today, I don't want to go to practice. We want to guide them along to make the right decisions. But this happens as an overall management process throughout being a child. It doesn't happen necessarily within the sport itself. And I think that's the difference between that and pressure. I think pressure happens more within practices and within the sport themselves. And everyone knows it. It's the loud parents on the sideline, the parents that can't do the things that they're telling the kids to do. You need to do this better. You need to do that better. You've got to run down the line. It's the parents that turn it into a job for the child. Or maybe it was a parent's dream when they were younger and they didn't get to fulfill it. Now they're imposing it on their child, where they're having them wake up at a certain time to do push-ups in the morning, or they're doing ice baths after training, and they're putting it on social media. So for me, there's a really important distinction between positive encouragement and pressure.
Automatically there, I can feel the pressure, the expectation, and I'm an adult. If you're a 12-year-old kid playing a game that, let's be honest, you start playing because you love the sport, you enjoy it. The rest then follows later. What is your role as a coach in helping both the young child involved and the parent being the best parent they can be in this situation?
So as we started with, my why for the young players, the reason I do it is to help them find joy in the journey. So for me, that's what it really centers around, is the fact that for parents that they turn it into a rat race, and it's not always their fault. Um, Academies will give feedback on each individual player at certain points throughout the season and points throughout their progression in the academy. And at no fault of the academy necessarily, it's to do with the resources they have and the time that they have with each player and parent. They'll give mostly, especially on the physical side, because it's not the most important, but it's not the football. They'll give very objective feedback. You know, his 10-meter sprint time was down. His jumps aren't as good as he used to be, or they're in the bottom 30% of the team, and the parents hear that, and they go into panic mode, absolute panic mode. And for the parents, it's about helping them relax and realize that if they actually shut up, you know, they could sit on the sideline with a deck chair and a margarita and say nothing, and their child might play better than if they were stood up shouting and telling them what to do. So it's about guiding that process and telling them, look, everything's going to be okay. I'm not a parent myself, so I have to say it, um, you know, carefully. And I've got a niece and nephews, so I do help my sisters with guiding them along. But I think what I really have to do is make them realize that, look, this goes quickly. You know, they're a child.
It's not necessarily so straightforward, though, is it? Because you look at pro sports and not just football. You hear the stories between Tiger Woods' upbringing and how his father would have him hit countless number of golf balls as he was growing up. The Williams sisters in tennis, their father would do the same. You look at the success that these elite individuals have had in their career, and it's only natural that if, as a parent, you're told your child has talent, has potential, you want the best for them. And it's that fine line, isn't it, between doing everything you can to provide the environment for that child to excel and overstepping the line.
Yeah, it's absolutely. It's again, I'm not saying don't encourage them. I'm not saying don't push them in the right direction, but to constantly force pressure onto them, it beats them down rather than raises them up. And I think to answer your question, the second part with the children, they almost don't realize what I'm doing. It's like a really good waiter. You don't realize when they're taking your glasses or taking your plates that they're really attentive without being noticed. And it's the same thing. It's not completely gamifying, right, and turning their training into a circus, but it's hiding the development journey that they're going through with me within certain games and certain fun and certain enjoyment. And they will somewhat understand the process, not properly because emotionally they're very different to adults like us. But I think yeah, it's guiding them along without ruining their love for sport and without actually ruining them as a child or a youth athlete.
And this is where we then bleed into the psychological aspects of it, the mental pressures that an individual can experience, because we live in the age of social media now. It's 24/7. There's no escaping it. Every child you know has a smart device and access to social media, be it videos, be it posts for seeing incredible pieces of skill, seeing the players, the professional athletes they worship, give their thoughts as well. And I do think when you talk about individuals at the age of 12, 13, 14, they're so receptive to all this. It's easy to lose the detrimental effects sometimes it can have, because at that age as well, you need the respite. So, how do you go about handling that? Because it's one thing to say, oh no, you shouldn't be on it 24/7. It's another thing entirely when all your friends are talking about this piece of media they've seen or something they're trying out. It's another thing entirely to try and section that off and be able to look after the individual.
Yeah, it's tough. Firstly, I'm very clear in my role as an athletic development coach. I can't manage the player as a whole or the parent and what they do. Ultimately, the end decision is made by the parents, in my opinion. To a certain degree, the parents are the decision makers. The children have a strong influence on that, but the parents are the decision makers. So I can only guide them and provide advice. And to go so far as to tell them what to do with social media and phones, I kind of have to stay out of that. But I think the environment I build and the whys behind what I do and the kind of morals that I have and the environment in the gym is very clear. So I think the parents and the children, they understand that. And I think if you can work with players that are often what you'll find is if you're not very well aligned at some point, you'll stop working together, um, and they'll go off in their own direction. You probably heard the saying, you can throw someone the ball, but they've got to shoot the basket. So to a certain degree, I can try and build the culture that I want to have with the players that I work with, but ultimately it's them that have to try and manage these things themselves.
So, as you pointed out there, this is the backdrop to this conversation, the culture around which we ask, is there a crisis in football right now? The other aspect to all this, of course, is you're dealing with youngsters, teenagers. Physically, they're developing all the time. What are some of the issues that you'll encounter along the way, which A, might inhibit progress, and B, might, for a time at least, mean that you have to concentrate on other areas whilst the body develops?
So I think the first thing is that there are not many adults. There are many people, but there are not many adults. Their physiology is very different to ours. They might seem like they have more energy, right? They're bouncing off the walls constantly. They're annoying. They don't show up, and in a sense, they do have more energy. They don't play 90-minute games on a full size pitch until a certain age, and their overall physical outputs, right? How hard they can sprint, how hard they can slow down and turn, it's much lower than ours. The energy cost is lower, and they do recover quicker. However, for females, when they get to the age of 12, they will start to go through the process of peak height velocity. I'll explain what that is. And for boys, it's between 13 and 15. So it's a little bit later. And there's a 2-year
So
gap.
you have to adapt your techniques and methodology accordingly.
100%. So throughout that process, they will grow. It depends on the individual. You have amateur maturers, average maturers, you have fast maturers and slow maturers. So they will grow quickly, generally, that in that period of life. Apart from when they're a baby, they will grow really quickly in height, in weight. Their limbs will get longer, they will get heavier, they will get stronger, they'll have more muscle mass. And one of the key differences is that usually the muscle and strength you gain will occur quicker than how the tendons adapt. And this is where you start to get issues with knees and ankles. Typically, the research shows it happens from a distal approach. So you get the ankles causing issues first, then the knees. I don't always see that. Most commonly with the players I've worked with is knees, and they'll often report knees first rather than ankles. The other issue you've got is coordination. They've got a lot taller and the limbs are a lot longer. So their brain doesn't know where they are in space. So the way that they move, their movement competency, their movement literacy, which for me is number one above any physical quality, we'll get onto that as well, is really affected. And this is where parents will feel even more pressure because they're being told by academy the kids got slower, they look slow on the pitch, they can't move properly, the kid doesn't understand why. And this now becomes an issue as well because if they move less efficiently and the parents taking them to a strength and conditioning session, they train 3 times with the club a week, and then they're doing 2 private sessions outside of the club and no other sports.
So you're
Again,
presented potentially with a scenario whereby you're acting on information without context.
right, exactly. And that they're constantly doing the same patterns, same actions over and over again, but they can't do them properly. Their tendons and their ligaments aren't really ready for what they're doing, and the now physical outputs that their body's putting out. And this is where stuff like Osgood-Schlatters and severs and even more serious injuries can come along.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Osgood-Schlatters, because I'm pretty sure everyone growing up, if you were sportingly inclined, will have dealt with knee pain. And whether it's given a label or not, it's something we'll all be able to relate to in an environment where you're aspiring to perhaps one day be a professional athlete. How significant is it?
It can be huge. There is research showing that players can have potentially one major injury throughout their academy process, and it very well might not affect their progression. It's when it happens repeatedly. And I think the other aspect with Osgood-Schlatters is that it can happen for like up to a year, maybe a little bit longer. It doesn't stop you from playing, which is good. But the big thing for me is that the reason it often occurs can be controlled, or it's something we can influence in terms of the training they do, but also how much is being imposed on their bodies. And when those are things you can control and change, for me it's a non-negotiable.
And this is, I guess, where the different stakeholders invested in any individual athlete have a big role to play, don't they? Because it's about being aware of the environment you're now working in when these ailments arise, and equally being able to act on it so that you don't unnecessarily push the individual to a point where they will break. But equally, if you direct your focus correctly, you can actually enhance them and enhance other skills going forward that then complement it once these ailments subside.
100%. So for me, it's a stakeholder model has the parent in the middle, because for me they're the ultimate decision maker. Even with the club, depending on how talented the child is and how much the club are prepared to put up with and want to keep that child in their academy, the parent
You
is
say that with a smile.
yeah, the parent is the ultimate decision maker. Next for me, you have the club, because they have S&C staff, medical staff, technical coaches. They manage the overall progression and monitoring and kind of really welfare
Mm.
of that child, and they might even somewhat be involved in the child's education if they get an education through the club. So there's two. Number three you have is their technical coach from outside the club. If you speak to a child now that plays football, they're in an academy, you can guarantee they have a technical coach from outside the club, whether they do it on a one-to-one basis or on a group basis, they'll have one. Often, if that's a good coach, they might work in an academy anyway, maybe even the academy that child goes to. And then the other you've got is the athletic development coach, like myself. And we have a duty to monitor, as well as the club, that child's maturation, because we might not always have communication with the club. That club might have hundreds of kids in their academy. If each kid has an S&C coach or an athletic development coach, and they're trying to communicate and ask for data on these players that the club don't need to give and don't have the time to give, this is where the stakeholder communication can break down and things can fail. So we have a duty to monitor that stuff and to make sure that we're not conflicting what the club do, but we're complementing it. And ultimately, the club will fill more of the load buckets of how much a child does. We're not there to do that and spill them over. We're there to work on the individual things that they might have issues with: knees, ankles, coordination, and just generally guide them along and expose them to things that maybe the club.
Can this process become frustrating for somebody like you in your position?
100%, and has been and will continue to be. Um, what I'm always going to have to manage and educate parents and try and guide them along this process. I don't always have communication with the coaches, the technical coaches. Often I do. In my area, the coaches that I work with, I have really good relationships with, and we'll communicate briefly on the players that we work with, and I can give them advice on maybe how much they should be doing in one-to-ones, and they'll receive it really well. But the hardest stakeholder to manage is the parent, because you can trust the club are going to look after them and not break them and guide them along. I have a good relationship with technical coaches, but the parent is the ultimate decision maker. let's say that the technical coach can't get them in for a session tonight, or they're off school for a week. That parent might go to another coach that players never worked with or worked with once or twice. We're going to throw you in for a session. Now that coach might have a completely different philosophy to the original technical coach, and they might throw them into some really intense training that they've not done before, and instantly you've got a spike in load for a child that potentially is right within the middle of their peak high velocity, and the next day they've got knee pain, and the parents are wondering why. And it's this kind of management that's really important. For me, there should be an extra stakeholder. Okay, so we're adding one more, which
Who would that be?
for me that would be another sports coach. Now that doesn't mean that they're necessarily involved in this child's journey as heavily as the club, the S&C coach, the technical coach. But for me, what the S&C coach does, as I say, shouldn't spill over the load buckets. What the technical coach does should really just work on individual areas for that child. They should still have enough space and energy and load tolerance to go and practice maybe one or two other sports. Now, the way that happens doesn't have to be intensive. Okay, the guidance that I usually give is if you can't physically fit this in, or that child can't tolerate it within a given week, they have 2 weeks off school. Sometimes they have a week off school. Sometimes they have 6 weeks off school, like they're coming up to. In those periods, usually they have to have time off the club as well. Not for the whole 6 weeks, but for a period. And usually in those periods, I'll say, should we have football? You don't need to come to me either. I'll assign you a challenge. If it's 1 week, one other sport. If it's 2 weeks, maybe 2 sports. If you've got 4 weeks off over the 6-week holidays, maybe a different sport a week. Or if you really like one sport, do that sport for the whole period. Let that stakeholder know that you're not joining to become a pro gymnast or Andy Murray. Yeah. Let them know why you're doing this as part of your journey, so they understand, not to kill you and not to put pressure on you, but just to give you a little bit of extra guidance. And I say treat it like tapas, okay, in the sense of you've got your main dish, all right, in the middle, but these are just little dishes around the side you can pick up. You know, you don't need to make them your main dish.
It's a great analogy, and there'll be some people listening to this podcast now with a vested interest in a particular athlete or a situation. They'll take a sharp intake of breath and say, "I'm not so sure about that." And that is a nice segue into Project Mbappe. First of all, everybody knows who Kylian Mbappe is, but what is Project Mbappe?
Project Mbappe is essentially, how do I term this? It's the project of a parent that wants to, as quickly as possible, turn their 8 or 9-year-old into a speed demon, elite football player that's going to make it at the top level, and they'll probably do anything and everything to make that happen.
Now, that'd be a wonderful thing if it was possible for everyone. It is not. That is just a factor of life. And I guess when we're dealing with youngsters, this again comes back round to, is there a crisis in football? Everyone wants to think that their son, their daughter can be the next big thing. At that age, more than any other, I've got to believe it's filled with perils and pitfalls.
Mm-hmm. I think the harder you try, the worse it goes. Again, going back to the example of sitting on the deck chair with a margarita at the side of the pitch, I think the harder you try, the worse it will go. I think ultimately, if your child has some sort of potential or talent and they want to hone it and you guide them in a positive way, whatever they have or will possess, they'll have. It will happen. If it doesn't happen, it won't happen. I'm not saying completely let go of it and don't encourage them to go in the right direction, but you can't force them there, because I think you will break them down. You will ruin their love for sport. You will probably have a negative effect on their social skills, because some parents might take their kids out of school. They might take them to just completely private one-to-one sessions where that child isn't having as much communication with other children. You might even cause some sort of resentment to yourself, and it's a long-term game. It's a real long-term game. That child can look completely different after their peak high velocity period, when they're now on to 15, 16 years old. You know, that they could go from small or tall, gangly to a physical machine if they're guided in the right way. So I think for me, in that sense, it's just whatever will happen, and enjoy the journey.
And let's be honest as well, sport across the board is littered with examples of late developers. Think of Ian Wright, who was so successful at Arsenal. You can think of Kurt Warner in the NFL, went on to be the Super Bowl MVP. You've got cricketers, Mike Hussey, the former great Australian batsman. I don't think he made his debut until he was 30 or thereabouts for Australia. It's easy to say be patient, but in the environment you work, that is a quality that's at a premium.
It's yeah, it's difficult. It's easier said than done. And we all know when we have an emotional investment in something, and there might be no stronger emotional investment than a child. It's really hard to be steady in when you're in that ship and it's rocking and there's waves and you're waiting for something to happen or you're waiting to go in a certain direction. It's not easy. So that's why it's a constant battle. It's a constant challenge. You don't tell a parent once and they register it and then you know things are understood and implemented. It's a constant process of reminding, and that's why players might work with me from the age of 12 to 16 and onwards. Sometimes I've had players that have come to me at the age of 12 and they're now 20 years old and they're still working with me through that journey. It's a constant journey that you're on them with, and it's about reassurance and guidance through each stage of that journey. Look at Yannick Sinner, current world number 1 in tennis. He's playing. Well, this podcast will already be out by then, but we'll see what happens. But he's playing Novak Djokovic tomorrow. Now, both him and Roger Federer, who's considered one of the most poetic players of all time, they did skiing for quite a long time, which I know you're a fan of as well.
I know many professional sports clubs would be horrified at the idea of their athletes going on skiing because of the risk involved.
Exactly, but these call them GOATs, some of the greatest of all time. Yannick Sinner's potentially on his way there. They did these things as children, and he's often thanked his parents. He actually thanked his parents in his victory speech at the Australian Open in January or it might have been last year, I can't remember, but either way, for the pressure that they didn't put on him and for the free will they give him to choose. And Roger Federer is also often credited his ability to move sideways and get around the court towards skiing and the movement that involves. And this is where treat like tapas and doing different things, you actually acquire more movement skill. That's for me, that's the key thing, is that pre-peak height velocity, neuroplasticity, which is basically the motor skills that your brain can pick up and acquire, it's much higher pre-peak high velocity. So in those periods, athletic and sporting skill is key. Roll, jump, hit, serve, volley, sprint, all of these things come together to create an athlete or a child who can move well, and they have more options and solutions to problems on the pitch or on the court that they need to solve.
So let's turn this question that we started with around then. And let me ask you, is football in crisis, or in your role, is football now a challenge?
It's a challenge. It's an ongoing challenge. Look, I think some of the players that are being produced at younger ages, the talents that are being produced are getting better and better. I think the job that academies are doing is getting better and better. For example, many academies now, 1 day a week for younger players, will have a multisport day where maybe someone comes in, or even the coaches there do it, and the players will engage in different sports, which I think is unbelievable. It's the song I've been singing for a long time, and academies are doing it. The buy-in from the players, from the kids, can vary at the minute, depending on the club, depending on how they do it, and sometimes because you're receiving it from the club rather than going somewhere for it, the buy-in can change a little bit. But I think it's a challenge. I think it's a challenge that there's a lot of coaches like me are fighting a good fight and working towards. Parents, they don't mean bad. They, we've spoke about how they're potentially managing things, but we're not bad mouthing them, or I'm not bad mouthing them. They want what's best for their children. It's just fighting that the emotional side of things
It's a challenge for them as well, isn't it?
Exactly. It's a challenge for all of us. It's a challenge for the clubs to manage this and manage parents' expectations. It's a challenge for the technical coaches when parents are telling them his feet aren't fast enough or her shooting's not good enough. It's an ongoing challenge, but I think things are slowly moving in the right direction.
It's good to always end on a positive note, and I love the fact that we're tackling it head on. For those that are interested in more of your thoughts on this particular subject and to follow the work you're doing, where can they find you on socials?
It'll be Aesthetic Athletes on Instagram. That's where you'll see most of my work.
Well, listen, it's been fantastic having you back on the podcast, Andy. A fascinating insight into different aspects of developing young athletes, particularly as well, that perhaps hopefully has been thought-provoking, and hopefully we'll have you on again soon.
Yes, thank you.
Unlocking sports science to push the limits of human potential. This is the Science for Sport podcast.
Many thanks to Andy for sharing his thoughts, knowledge and expertise on a subject that is sure to continue to provoke debate. And if you enjoyed what he had to say and want to find out more, then you can do so by visiting our website, www.scienceforsport.com. And if you enjoyed this episode in particular, please do feel free to share it with a coach, a colleague, an athlete or a friend. Remember, the more downloads we get, the easier it becomes for us to attract top-name athletes and professionals such as Andy leading the way in their field. Well, that's just about all for this week's episode. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to the next time you can join us on the Science for Sport podcast.
Subscribe to the Science for Sport podcast now, wherever you listen to your podcasts. For more insights, resources, and to join the Academy, visit scienceforsport.com and connect with us on social media by searching for @ScienceForSport. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.